just like to say that when I was putting this presentation together, it was when the tragic news that Meatloaf had died that I was doing this. So I was desperately trying to find a Meatloaf theme to this, but had failed miserably. So you'll see that I have got a bit of a music theme going on. But if by the time we get to the end of this presentation, you have thought of any other sort of Meatloaf songs that would have fitted the bill nicely, it would be good if you could point those out at the end. That would be really helpful for future presentations, so thank you. So next slide, please, Chris. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is just go through really the steps that I think, and this is coming from me as a complete non-academic, but to be able, these are the steps that I would suggest that it's worth going through if you want your research really to sort of reach the outside world, but engage with it and actually try to influence change, which I think sits quite nicely along with the debate that we were having earlier about sort of the pure sort of presentation of academic research versus the advocacy role that you may want to play or may want to play in partnership with other organisations. So that's what I'll do throughout this presentation, is look at through the sort of steps that I think it's worth going through, and then I'll go through an example of something that we at SHAAP worked on with other partners towards the end of last year. Thanks, Chris. So yes, this is the first musical introduction. We're working through these steps. So the first step is, this is what I think, so I'd be really interested to know what you think as well in terms of whether this is what you would do or whether it's you've experienced of doing this kind of thing. But I think it's important to go back to the beginning, because I think research can take months and years to complete, and it's really important, I think, to go back to the beginning and think about what it was that interested you in this and what made you think that this is something that was worth looking into, and what sort of change you maybe thought you envisaged when you were setting out on this research, that this research could influence. It's also important to think, what is, if you do want to use this research to influence people or change, what or who is it that you want to influence? Are we talking about Scotland? Are we talking about the UK? Are we talking about internationally? Are we talking about wanting to influence others in the world of academia, or do you want to influence policymakers or advocacy groups? Who is it that you want to influence here, if at all? And also then, think about what the ultimate key messages are that you want to get over from your research into the outside world. I think this is really important because it's like sort of distilling it down to like the essence of what you want to get out there. So this is what I think is important, to think, go back to basics. What is it you wanted to achieve with this, and then make your mark with it. Next slide. So it's really important to think about what else is going on in the outside world that might influence or dictate how your research is going to land. So who's interested in this particular issue, and map them out, whether it's policymakers, other organisations, various different stakeholders that across in any sort of sphere. So who is it that's interested in this issue, and who do you want to be interested? So if there's actually zero interest in this amongst a key group of people, so for instance, if you're doing something that's pretty groundbreaking, but you're pretty sure that, for instance, officials in the Scottish government haven't actually thought about this, and it's just really not on their radar, then how do you get to those people and start thinking about this ahead of launching any research? Work out who your allies are, and also work out who it could be that might cause you a problem when you launch your research, who might question it, who might disagree with it in a public arena, that you that might pose you a bit of a challenge. And then also think, what's the mood music more generally on this issue? Also think about what else is going on in the real world, because I think it's quite easy, and this is something that I've been very aware of at SHAAP, is that you sort of get really into your issues and think, why doesn't the rest of the world care about this? But you've got to remember that you're looking at something that is potentially quite narrowly focused within a wider issue, potentially of alcohol policy, within a massive world of loads and loads of other things that are going on. So there's so many competing priorities. So it's how you put out your research in a way that's most effective and resonates with people quite as widely as possible. Thanks, Chris. So this is Pink Floyd album cover, and this is, I suppose, the point I'm trying to make here is that you can put out your messages and what you want to get out into the real world, but it will go in different directions. People will interpret it differently and use it in different ways, or not at all. Okay, the next slide. So the important thing to do way before I'm thinking about launching your research is planning it. So work out you know, all the work that you've done in terms of mapping out who's got an interest, who's not got an interest, engage with all those people so that ahead of your launch, so that you've got a way, you've got a plan so that you can have some degree of control and make the most of your research. And then think post-launch, what else can you do to make sure that your research makes a difference, whether it's engaging with those allies, identifying opportunities such as events to present your findings at, whatever it may be, and sort of consider the difference between dissemination and influence. So there's getting your research out there so that people are aware of it and will talk about it and signpost people to it, but it's also then using that research to influence and make change. So I don't think there's any harm here in aiming high and doing what you can to make a big splash, but then keep it going. Okay, next slide. So I'll talk through an example here. So you may remember that last year, the Institute of Alcohol Studies and Alcohol Action Ireland and ourselves commissioned research at Stirling Uni to look at how often alcohol was referenced in broadcasts of 3 Six Nation matches. So I'll work through here the launch of that research, the work that we did with the media, how social media played a role, and then what we're doing with that to influence policy. So next slide. So give music a rest just now. So we had held our webinar launch event, and it is important. So whilst I think this is not the be all and end all, it is important because it's the first stage of sort of making noise around this particular issue and building up a bit of buzz and interest, and it's where you start the dissemination of your research. But also, if you're particularly lucky, you can use that launch event to engage with policymakers as well. So maybe I know we've got Scottish Government officials in this meeting, but maybe officials will be there to at least find out what the research findings are saying. But also we can have others, like, for instance, this MP, Wani Cowan, was at the event and tweeted about it. And this is a sort of, then you start to realise that you can use that launch to engage with policymakers on a good day. So next slide. So this is an example. These are just some examples of the media coverage we've got around our launch. It's just a sample, and we also did a number of broadcast interviews in Scotland, UK/England, and also Ireland as well, because the findings were relevant in all those countries, and it was a really useful report in each of those nations. Next slide, please. So why is it important to engage with the media launching any sort of research findings? Again, this is about noise and dissemination and building up that buzz. So it is a really important element because it's a way of really sort of reaching audiences that you wouldn't be able to reach if you just focused on an event or, you know, distribution lists and that kind of thing. So it is a really important element, but it is risky because you can't necessarily, well, you can't control the response. So this is why it's actually a good idea, if you can, to engage with journalists way ahead and build up relationships with key journalists if you can, doing that groundwork. Otherwise you couldn't get a negative response from other people commenting in response to your research, or it may be that some media outlets do have a particular angle on issues that we may be talking about that it's very difficult to control, but potentially by trying to build up relationships, you can maybe at least neuter that a little bit. But it is also good to engage with your allies in advance of media work so that people, if they're asked for comment by journalists on your research, they know what the key messages are and can respond quite quickly and positively to any requests. Next slide. So then social media is really important throughout all of this work. So it's important at the launch. It can be a way of sort of engaging throughout the launch event and making and building up that, again, noise. And it's also, and it can use that with the media to engage with journalists as well. And it's also an important part of influencing and policy work as well, although certainly not the be all and end all. And it isn't risk-free either, so you can't always control the response. And there is also a risk that you're always talking into your little echo chamber. But I think it is an important way, again, of it's certainly a way of disseminating and getting a feel for the mood out there as well. Next slide. And then these are some examples of a bit of the policy influencing work that we as SHAAP did in Scotland. So Alcohol Action Ireland did their own work in Ireland, and the IAS did their own work in England as well. But we used it as a way to really gain a sort of insight into the level of interest or support in looking at regulating marketing and sponsorship of around alcohol within sports. We were lucky that we've got a Green MSP and the Greens obviously in a sort of coalition with the SNP and government in Scotland, which again is really useful. So we had a relationship in advance with this MSP, who then did quite a lot of work around it in terms of tabling parliamentary questions and tabling a motion in the Scottish Parliament, which then is a really good way of gauging how much support we'd have from other parties on this issue and keeping the issue live in the Parliament as well, and building up that sort of coalition of support. So that has been really useful. And those are just a few bits and pieces from that work. Thanks, Chris. So it's really important, I think, that, I mean, I don't know, it's good to get your take as well from the world of academia, is why, like, to me, this is the point in research, is to use it to actually influence policy and make change happen. So that's definitely how I feel about it, but it'd be good to know what you think. It's good to, this is all involves groundwork, relationships, research into what party policies are, and then we can use this research to influence party policy behind closed doors as well, not necessarily all out in front in the Scottish Parliament. And then you need to know the structures and the processes around the Scottish Parliament. In this case, this is what we did. So then we can engage with key MSPs, get it up their agendas and work out what opportunities there are in the Parliament, whether there's parliamentary inquiries by different committees or debates where we can get these issues aired and move it up the agenda. It all really forms part of our long-term plan in terms of getting alcohol marketing and sponsorship included within the Scottish Government's consultation on restricted marketing later this year. So it all fits into that bigger picture. Next slide, please. So these are what, to me, the sort of key things to think about when doing this kind of work, is to take the broader context into account and work out where your piece of work fits in, do your research, work out who your allies are, work out where your problems may be, and sort of build those relationships where at all possible ahead of doing any actual launch, and then plan and prepare as much as possible. But also bear in mind that there's going to be so many opportunities that may arise as well after launch that you may not have foreseen, to be able to take your research forward and engage with other organisations and other people to take your research forward and instigate a bit of change. So that's it. Oh, there's one last image. But I do think that's really important, that it is working in partnership with others and sort of doing it as much as you can, capitalising on the relationships that you have with others. And that's why I think there ain't no stopping us altogether. So thank you.